The July 28th, 2015 meeting of the Ordinance Committee. Ms. Wong, would you take the roll, please?
Yes. Councilmember Rouse?
Here.
Councilmember Hotchkiss?
Here.
And Councilmember Murillo?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, we have public comment for any member of the public who wishes to speak on an item not on the agenda. Is anybody from the public who wishes to speak? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. And I have actually a first thing I was going to do is an agenda request. I would like to, because the second item seems like it should be pro forma. I was wondering if, with the committee's indulgent, if we would go first with item 2.
Very good.
You good with that? Okay, very good. Is there a staff report on item 2, Ms. Wong?
Yeah.
Okay, can we go forward with that, please, and then we can dispense with that and get into our second item.
Excuse me. Bill Hornung, do you have staff here to report on? Are you ready to go? Yes, I'm ready to go. Okay. Look, it sounds like we're going to change the order.
Thank you.
Okay. And we'll change what's up on the screen.
Scott had to step out. So. I'm always right next to Bill. Good afternoon.
No. There you go.
Okay. It looked like it was on. Good afternoon. I'm here to present proposed changes to the municipal code. It's been a number of years since we updated it, and one of the emphasis of the change is to look at our bidding thresholds so we can match staffing levels to workloads to try to be use them efficiently and effectively. And again, the municipal code sets our bidding thresholds. So one of the things we did was we looked at other agencies in the area, and you'll see some slides on that in the presentation to see how our current thresholds compare to other public agencies. And what we found that they were low. Currently, we do what we call it informal bidding for things over $2,500 to $25,000. What informal bidding is a competitive process minus the advertising element. Things over $25,000 we advertise, so it's open to the world, and anybody that sees the ad can respond. And then again, for things under $2,500, it's what I call market price, where we only need a single quote, and then as long as we feel that price is reasonable, we can move forward with the purchase. Again, this is kind of what I already described. Again, the code tells us when we do the informal process, we need to attempt at least 3 quotes when it's practical. Again, often the departments will get the quotes for us, but there are times where the purchasing department will get the informal quotes. And just like with formal bids, we award to the lowest responsive bidder. That meets our specifications. Again, with formal bidding, we create what we call a request for bid package, which includes the scope of work from the department, and we kind of package that around our general terms and conditions. We advertise in the paper. We also post the notice on the city's webpage. And the bid needs to be open for a minimum of 14 calendar days. Sometimes if something's more complex, it may be open for a longer period of time. Or if we require a job walk, a lot of times we'll be open longer as well. Again, with those, we receive a sealed bid, and those are publicly opened in the purchasing office, and they're read out loud, so anybody from the public can attend a bid opening. Again, with the proposed changes, it's not going to materially affect what is currently going to council. Currently, council approves public works contracts over $35,000, and that would still be the case. Professional service agreements over $35,000 go to council. Sole sources, right now the code has $25,000 hard coded into it. One of the changes we're recommending is to increase that to $35,000 to match the authority that was recently delegated to the city administrator. And again, anything that doesn't follow the prescribed process in the code would go to council, any deviations. Again, competition is required for both formal and informal bidding processes. As I stated earlier, right now, anything over $2,500 goes through some sort of competitive process. And the goal is kind of trying to find the right balance to make sure we're spending money judiciously and that, make sure the departments are not gaming the system, but also kind of match our workloads with the thresholds and to maximize potential savings. Again, here's a chart where we compared our lower threshold, which is the $2,500, to other agencies. You can see we're down here, so we're like the lowest pretty much of everybody we looked at. So that creates a lot of workload. We have 2 buyers, so it keeps them pretty busy. With our higher threshold, again, you can see we're down among the lowest. And there's a lot of effort involved with doing formal bidding. So again, as I said, we want to kind of match workloads to our staffing levels. What I have here is a chart. It's the red line's the volume, like the number of POs issued, and the green line's the total dollar amount. Right now at the $2,500 threshold, about 20%, that represents, where did the cursor go? That represents about 26% of our workload, yet it accounts for less than 2% of the dollar we spend. What we're proposing is to move it to the $7,500 level. And I think this is about 52, 53% by volume. But it only represents, it's this axis over here, it's only at 7.5% of the dollar spent. Then for the upper threshold, again, right now we're at the $25,000 is where we do advertising. This red line represents almost 18% by volume, and the dollar amount is a little over 70%. If we go to the 75,000, by PO count, it'll drop to about 7.5%. But dollar amount, it still counts for almost 60% of the dollar spent. Feel free to stop me if you have any questions. I see you writing down, so I know there's questions. Again, what we're trying to do is balance the workload so that staff has time to focus on the more complex, larger dollar purchases and free their kind of the busy work with these low dollar purchases where there's really no or minimal opportunity for savings and they tend to be low risk. Again, we haven't adjusted the bidding threshold since 2009. And even some of the agencies we had in that comparison, they're even looking at changing their thresholds. So, because some of them haven't done so in a number of years. And as the charts pointed out, the city thresholds were among the lowest, or were the lowest. So what we're recommending is increase the informal bidding range from $2,500 to $25,000. I mean, that's the range right now is $2,500 to $25,000. To change that range from to $7,500 to $75,000. And the $75,000, that just analyzing our distribution of POs makes sense. And also a number of years ago, we increased the threshold for maintenance and repair bids from $25,000 to $75,000. So that was carved out separately. And departments get kind of confused having dual thresholds. So one nice touch by making this $75,000, regardless if you're buying something new or doing a repair, the thresholds are now in alignment. And then what we're recommending is increasing the formal bidding threshold from $25,000 to $75,000. Again, this will have no impact what goes to council, because a lot of times when we go out and if we're going to buy a fire truck, as long as we do the competitive process, that gets awarded without going through council. So it's not going to affect what you're seeing.
Okay, Mr. Hodges.
Let's go back to that last slide if we could.
Backwards.
So anything below 75,000 will have informal bidding. Anything above it will have formal bidding, it's simply said, right?
Yes.
And is there a review process? Is that reviewed in the, within the department? Let's say staff members say, well, we ought to do this. How is that discussed within a particular department?
Not sure if I understand your question, but
Well, I'm just wondering if you've got any checks and balances here. Who's
kind of the way it works is the departments will submit a requisition. And we require them to at least have a budgetary quote to kind of establish the price. And if they get a budgetary quote or show a catalog and it's above 75,000, purchasing will use their spec, and we put that out for bid, and the department kind of signs off on it. And then when the bids come in, they're publicly open and reviewed by purchasing. And then we send them to the department to review them to make sure that they're compliant with their specification.
So the department head signs off on it and the purchasing signs off on it?
The department signs off on it, correct, and then
Okay.
purchasing will issue the purchase order.
You mentioned at one point that we put bids in the paper. I can't remember what
Yes.
exactly was it. What papers and for how long?
It's a charter requirement that says we have to have a paper of record. Right now, that's the Montecito Journal, and they're allowed to have a contract up to 2 years, which I think it's coming up, so we'll be doing another bid for our official paper.
Okay, so it's just the journal right now?
Correct, we do the journal, and we post it on our city web page. I
Okay.
think more people get hear about bids through our webpage. We also
okay.
keep track of vendors that request to bid on certain type of items. We do maintain that list, and we use that to help create a bidders list.
So do we think that if we had more publications, let's say the Independent and the News Press and the Journal, we would get greater response, or is that just everybody's trained to go right now to the Journal and to look online?
Actually, I've been collecting some data, but I haven't had a chance to analyze it. I feel very few people read it, whether it's a newspaper, the news press, the journal. I don't think that's the way people are learning about it. What I find is people have search engines, and they find out from our webpage more than
Okay.
the paper publication.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Maria.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I work with you on the Living Wage Committee, so I know how you work. I really trust, if this is your opinion, that it's a good thing to do, Mr. Hornung. I believe you. But I did want to ask Mr. Samario, as our finance director, I assume, you're for this too. And the only thing I would ask is if you would keep an eye on something that might happen because of the change, if there's a trend or a negative trend. I don't know what to anticipate, but it does seem like the values are changing somewhat drastically, even though compared to other jurisdictions, cities and counties, it seems like we're focusing on some details. I like the argument that it will free up your department to look for more savings, right, when you're purchasing things, maximizing the savings potential. That's a great argument for me. I guess I just wanted to hear from Mr. Samario if there's a way to keep an eye on it as it unfolds.
Sure. I mean, we will always keep an eye. Purchasing staff does a pretty good job of reviewing all these documents anyway. The one thing that for me makes me feel good about this is that we're still having a competitive process all the way to $75,000 and beyond. What we're doing is we're just changing the formality of that process. So rather than advertising and having a longer period of time and requiring departments to do a lot more work, we're saying let's minimize the amount of work. We're still going to have that informal process that is competitive, so we're not just picking a vendor, for example, to purchase something. It's still going to go through some competitive process, just not going to be as extensive and as formal, which is going to be more efficient for the departments. I know they appreciate this, and they're looking forward to this because it's going to reduce their workload. And we believe we as staff and purchasing can focus, as Mr. Hornick said, on the things where we can really achieve the most savings, where we're really advertising it broadly and looking for the greater amount of savings potential.
Thank you. I'm ready to make a motion. Okay, thank you. I move the staff recommendation to amend these bidding thresholds.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those are in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Passed unanimously. Thank you. On this second item, I was not here for the first bite of the apple of the news rack issue, so I might first ask, other than staff, is there anybody here for this issue? Okay. We are all in receipt of a letter from Mr. Cole, who represents the Independent, who requested to delay this in light of the fact that Mr. Wozniak, who apparently has been focusing on this for the city, as well as Mr. Cole, are both out of town right now. So he was requesting an extension, but I think I would leave that up to the pleasure of the committee. I was not here for the first. I don't know if we covered enough ground to where we think we've got an idea, or if we need to have the input of those other stakeholders. And I'll take input from Ms. Rio.
Thank you, Chair Rouse. I think that the Independent made the formal request, but that the other publications and also the distributors would benefit from having one more round of a stakeholders meeting to go over the proposed changes, the ordinance and some of the changes, some of the refinements that have been taking place. And it's not just the newspapers themselves, but there's a whole business, a whole industry of distribution. And I think that all of those players need to be engaged as this goes forward. I think there's benefit to waiting until those two individuals are back in town and having one more go at a stakeholders gathering, which Mr. Cole is offering to host and convene. So I would suggest that and sorry, you're all here, all ready to go. I've heard the argument that there needs to be more time.
Mr. Hotchkiss.
Well, if anybody had shown up other than Mr. Cole, I would have said go forward because it would have been inconsiderate for them. We only got this request in the last 48 hours, I think. But considering that that's not the case, and unless it places some particular strain on staff, I'd say let's postpone this for a week or whenever it was next. What would be next?
Mr. Cullen.
Chair Rouse, members of the committee, I wasn't going to speak to the date when it could be continued to. I did want to address what I heard Councilman Murillo suggest as another stakeholder meeting. I would resist that only because we provided an actual Word document of our ordinance to Mr. Cole, and he redlined it and returned it to us. Ms. Ostringer made detailed changes in about 10 different areas to our ordinance in response. We sent those back to Mr. Cole, and I believe the email thread you've received includes his responses such as they were. So what I would be looking for, frankly, is a more earnest engagement from the newspaper representatives on what we've already given them. I wouldn't foreclose a meeting, but I wouldn't want to be directed to conduct another one if that's your pleasure.
No, I agree with that totally. I'm just saying let's postpone this and just not a stakeholders meeting, just do this again at the next available opportunity.
Well, that's certainly up to the pleasure of the committee. I will have to say that this is an ordinance committee that will be forward, obviously, to council for the public hearing. So there will be a chance for the stakeholders to be heard in another venue, and in deference to staff time and preparation. I don't know, Mr. Kelly, if you feel like the engineering department is ready to roll on this from your perspective without Mr. Wozniak, then might be consideration for the committee.
Thank you. Thank you for consideration, Councilmember, Committee Chair Rouse, and committee members. Is that we have a 10-minute presentation. I myself have been working with John Wasiak for many years, and I'm very familiar with anything and all things he said, and that I'd suggest just having, if you can spare 15 minutes, 10 minutes for presentation and a short introduction, we can move forward and see if the context is something, a context that I have that John may not have had. I've been working with news racks for 22 years. He may only have 10. So I can double the perspective that council may have had on this topic.
All right. Well, absent a motion from the committee, I think we'll go forward.
I'm sorry. I really think that I don't want to waste your time today if we're coming back and you're going to make the same presentation when we return. It's up to the stakeholders themselves to convene and come back to us. If staff doesn't want to sit in on that, absolutely fine. I agree with Councilmember Hotchkiss. Let's just postpone this. Make it a simple.
Well, I've changed my mind. I'd like to hear what you've got to say, and if we can move forward with this, let's do it.
All right, please continue.
We'll do our best to make it as concise as possible. As I mentioned earlier, is that I'm sitting in for John, who is on vacation, and I can add a little bit more context to what the presentations he's made in the past. I'll be introducing Tom Scott here in a minute, who will have about a 10-minute presentation. And the bottom line here is that the existing ordinance is really not functional. It has a requirement for applications that require sketches of up to 100 feet in each direction of each site that each applicant is to have. We have no applications on record, so the intent here is just to simplify the existing ordinance and update it in such a way that it's manageable for the participants that have news racks and also for the public at large. I am familiar with 22 years of complaints, and John possibly only 10. And over the years, I can say that, you know, in the first few years I was here, it'd just be periodically people complain about this and that. And the world of publications was radically different 22 years ago than it is now. We have many more empty racks than we've ever had. Could be probably because of the internet, is my guess. And it's to the point where actually the publications aren't really taking very good care of it, to the fact that we even had one rack just fell over and someone tripped on it, made a claim. We were able to defend ourselves and were left out. But just the same is that we're getting more and more instances of this throughout the city. So something needs to be done. I do not believe that the existing ordinance is plausible. And I believe John and Tom and Teva have done an excellent job in updating it. And that's it in a nutshell. And I'd like to turn it over to Tom to make a presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Pat. That's good information to get me going here. So I think two of you have seen this before, last presentation, so I will, thanks. So I will try to make my way through it here. So we're proposing to amend the ordinance and replace Chapter 5.66 of the Municipal Code. The background is because it's aging news racks, safety concerns, as Pat mentioned. The ordinance just needs some update with some improvement. News rack management, which is to know what we have out there and give it a condition and see what needs to be done in the entire city to bring these news racks up to the standard of condition. We've had stakeholder coordination. We've been holding open meetings with the stakeholders for quite some time, and we even started out where we were contacting them and just letting them know that we were going to update the ordinance, or we had intentions to do that, and to get them involved. And that's been an ongoing effort. And new fees are proposed. The old fees were kind of a different format, but they're only paying for the cost for the program. We had a meeting. Our last meeting we met here was June 30th, and we had some stakeholder concerns, and that was cost protection. The industry is somewhat struggling, and they want to lower the costs, and they also don't want to see spikes occur going forward. So they're sensitive to that. It's probably their number one concern that we've realized. They're interested in keeping advertisement out there. There's a concern about sharing of the pedestals. Some of these racks hold multiple units, and they're shared pedestals. We never had a record of who owns those and maintains those, so we're addressing that issue. They had concerns about the appeal process that the Public Works Director takes to have the news racks removed. And so there's been an appeal process was an issue. And then just ordinance wording clarifications were also brought up. We met with the stakeholders on June 6th, about a week after that meeting. We discussed the issues. We had some better understanding of what they're asking for at the last ordinance meeting, and we made attempts to address those. And that's what you have before you today for the new ordinance update. This is some of the inventory that's greatly improved, how we're going to manage the system. Before we had just some drawings. This shows some software that we have with locations of the news rack. In each one of these locations, there's probably several units out there. We have about 150 locations and about 600 news rack units out there. And then the lower picture shows the data that we carry into the inventory, which is a lot of photographs. We have generally 5 photographs of each news rack, and this is to be done every year. It also puts the time that we're out there, the location of it on a map, and it allows us to take a condition of this in accordance with the ordinance. The condition criteria that's in the existing ordinance is not changing with the new ordinance. So this is just really a way to manage this. It's quick, fast. There's no submittal of drawings. And so I think this new management technique is going to be very helpful to those who have news racks. These are stickers that we put on there that we call registration stickers to help us identify the news racks. And we take a picture of these also. And it's a way of identifying the actual unit. This is a map showing the city, part of the city where most of the news racks are. The cyan color is are outside of the district, and they're privately owned. And then there's down State Street, there's you'll see some that are green in color and yellow. The yellow are masonry type of city-owned racks that units can go on, and the green ones are the city-owned cabinets that individual units can go into, that we house those. And there's a dashed line going down towards the end of State Street to La Entrada, so we're expanding that city-owned cabinet district down there. So we'll be seeing a few more locations where we'll have those cabinets. And here's an example of the city-owned cabinets in the green, and then the one on the right are the masonry type of cabinets. So the enhancements of the ordinance update are regular monitoring and managing these. New permitting and registration, which is much simpler. We're obtaining insurance through just the regular public works permit process, establishing fees, establishing who maintains the pedestals that house the several units. And we've also went to HLC and ABR to find some information on how they'd like to have them maintained, painted, and what type of racks they would like to see out there as new racks come in or they're maintained. Here's the new fees. They're based on an annual fee per box. And there's an additional annual fee for the units that are housed within the city's cabinets, because those take some additional maintenance. And so this is based on cost recovery. The $236 application fee would be for any new locations or new units that go in. These would not apply to existing units. So somebody that's out there that's not in the city-owned area would pay $13 per box annually at the current rate that's proposed. So here's some pictures of just typical installations that we have. You can see that there's different types of boxes, different colors, and some of the conditions of them.
And to go back to that picture, these would all be uniform after this?
No, the ones that are there would pretty much be grandfathered in, but they would be brought up to current condition standards.
Okay, thank you.
If they are replaced, they would have to meet the standard. Some of the replacement, though, is they do maintenance. They take the units away and they bring back another unit, and they go and maintain the unit that was there. So we're not really counting that as a replacement or a new installation, but as they're retired in those locations and somebody else wants to go back in, it would be up to the standard.
So does that mean that more and more probably they would all be the standard color of the green that I think?
Yes, so they've, ABR and HLC, those want the news racks to be green.
Sure, okay, good, thanks.
Kathy?
And
Question.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. So if the ordinance passes in El Pueblo Viejo, for instance, right at this location, they would have to be painted green right away, or they would be painted green when it came for maintenance or replacement?
Yes, thank you for that question. They would be painted green when they're due for maintenance.
Okay. I
So if they're
think that was
brown-
an important point that I heard from
Yes.
the industry. Thank you.
Here's kind of the typical style that was approved by ABR and HLC. And here's one that has like 2 cabinets in it. It's like a dual. Can have 2 different publications in it. That's also one of the standards. And they can. This one particularly is on a pedestal that has, a rack and the post for several units, and different owners are on there. This could also be a freestanding unit. So if nobody wanted to take ownership of the pedestals, that would be removed, and they could just put a different base on that particular unit. And then this is the city cabinets with a unit that's inside that's owned by one of the individuals. We have about 10 owners within the city that own all these units. And here's a picture of some pedestals that have some vacancies on them. We've also addressed that, and we want to make sure that when there's a vacancy that there's not a low protrusion of the pedestal, that low profile rack that's standing out there where somebody could get hurt. So we want to keep units on the end of these and allow them to be modified to take up so that there's not empty space on those. So that's another part of the ordinance that we've updated.
Question?
Yes.
Hey, I'm sorry. Remind me of your name, please.
I'm Tom Scott.
Thomas Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Scott? So this would be an acceptable rack under the new rules as long as there was 2 on the end? Is that what I heard you say?
No, we want to make sure that there's 2 on the end, but this would not be acceptable. We'd have them move these racks towards the news press rack, and then we'd have them modify the pedestal itself and clip some of it off. If
There would be consolidation
Right.
for an appearance of neatness?
Right.
Right, okay. Thank you.
So this is going to be adjusted if we're going to come back again, but we're currently scheduled in August 11th to go to City Council. And with adoption of the ordinance, could happen as early as September 8th. This is kind of a timeline for registration of the news racks would happen within 30 days, 90 days for compliance. And then implementation, if there's greater than 30 news racks that somebody owns, they're going to need a little bit more time to start doing the maintenance and changing some of these out, painting them, refurbishing them, or whatever is needed. So we're trying to work with them. But we're looking to achieve the full compliance by July 1st of 2016. 2016? So we're about a year out. And that's the end of the presentation.
Okay,
Thank you.
any questions from the committee? I do have a public speaker. Go ahead.
Speaker, please. I'd like to hear public.
Okay. Scott Kaufman, please. And you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Scott Kaufman, Circulation Director for the Santa Barbara Independent. I want to thank the council members and the staff. It's been a long and involved process for us. This is really important for our paper, certainly in terms of what we do, putting out the paper, and we put a lot of time and effort into it. Especially Joe has met with a lot of people. He's put a lot of thought and effort into it. We've been through this before, at least I have, 15 or 20 years ago when we did do an ordinance in the city of Santa Barbara. We did pay fees, and we did get the same kind of number slips for our racks, and I guess they don't exist anymore. Nonetheless, we do see the need for this, and we want our racks to look good. We've put thousands of dollars into it. We continue to. That being said, I would like to ask for a delay as far as putting this through today because of we do have some concerns as far as the fees. Joe Cole, this is the first meeting he's missed. He's in Irvine with his son today. And I know that he wanted to be here today. But I would ask that we put it off if we could, even for a short term, so that he could be involved. He's the publisher, the owner, he's an attorney, and he's been closely involved in this, and we've put a lot of work into it. We'd like to finish it off, and we'd feel more comfortable if it was delayed. Thank you.
I had a question for you, Mr. Kaufman. And first of all, I did talk to Joe yesterday, but as I said in the preamble, this is just us recommending what to do to council. Full council will have this in a hearing once again. So
okay.
You'll get that hearing will happen. So you have plenty of time. Okay. When you go to maintain your racks, do you have like an independent contractor or somebody that goes out and does the painting and the repainting, or how do you normally maintain your racks?
It's all in-house for us.
So you have people in-house to go out and paint and clean and do that kind of thing?
We do. And we've, over the years, we've had to spend more and more money on it because it's a matter of our image being preserved in terms of how it looks on the street. So even before it came to our attention that there were complaints from some of the public about the street stands, I mean, we would get calls, too, from people. We don't get as many as we used to because we kind of upped the ante maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. We started buying more new street stands. We started cleaning graffiti more frequently than we had been. And we hired a staff to go out and take care of it. And that's what we're doing right now. I think our street stands look great, probably the best on the street. And I know the news press tries hard too. It's difficult. But there's probably, from 15 or 20 years ago, there's probably half as many street stands out on the streets now. There just aren't that many that exist anymore. There are some vacant ones I've noticed, not necessarily independent. I mean, they do run out. But we've noticed fewer street stands. We've noticed the papers trying to take better care in the city of Santa Barbara, and we are just simply interested in working through the details of this agreement. One of the things that we're concerned about is the money. I can't
let you go too far. You just have to respond to my question. Then
I'm sorry.
We'll have another bite at this. So,
of course.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Ms. Murillo.
May I follow up with a question to
Certainly.
staff, since you're talking about fees, about the question of cost protection? What I heard was the figure for per hour, $115 per hour for staff. I support that. Except what the concern is, well, are we talking about 2 hours of staff time or 10 hours? You can see how that's a completely different figure. What is your response then about being able to give some assurances to the industry about cost protection?
Yeah, I think we based it on our rate, and 500 hours per year is what we came up with.
500 hours?
I think that's what it is. I might have not missed bringing that sheet. But the cost protection, though, we have we've lowered it to where we can recovery on fee recovery, and we've also indexed it per I think it was the Los Angeles Orange County cost of living.
And at our next presentation, we can bring back more detailed information regarding those types of specifics, like the number of racks, the estimated number of hours of inspection per year, and then that give you an idea of the flexibility or of how the fees and the inspection works. I believe this is based on the assumption of an annual inspection.
Okay,
Ms. Ostrander.
2 more questions, I'm sorry.
Chair Rouse.
Councilmember Murillo, if I could just respond and
Okay.
add to that.
Oh, go ahead.
The ordinance has been drafted to limit the city's ability to recover fees to cost recovery only. And then in speaking and meeting with the stakeholders, we've also added a provision that it won't increase beyond the CPI percentage. So even if the cost recovery, as we determined it, was greater than the CPI, we're limiting it to the CPI rate. And we've also, I've put in there just to make it, there was some concern that some of the distributors wouldn't know where to look for the fee resolution. So we've indicated that it will be available on the city website, and I've made that clear in the ordinance so that anyone looking knows where to go to see what the fees will be.
Right, and I heard concerns. I mean, we do raise fees with every budget cycle, pretty much. I was on the Finance Committee for a little while. So I guess it's incumbent on the industry to know when that budget cycle comes around and, you know, if and when because their fees are not going to stay static, are they?
Chair Rouse, Councilmember Murillo, let me address that. As Ms. Ostrander said, we put some extraordinary language into the ordinance.
Really?
That does 2 things. First, it restates the constitutional limitation that fees can't exceed the cost of service. That's when they're initially established. Secondly, though, we limit how high they can grow. So let's say staff inflation is 3.5% a year in salaries. And let's say that the CPI is going up at 1.8% per year. These fees would be limited to the lower 1.8% number. That's unprecedented in your municipal code. So what you would be doing if you go forward with this ordinance is essentially limiting future city councils to recover less than the maximum costs they could recover for newsrack fees. And those were 2 protections that came out of our meeting with Mr. Cole, Mr. Kadich, and several other representatives of the industry. So we've been, I interject because we've been extremely responsive on that issue, and responsive enough that I almost want to caution you by letting you know that it does limit the discretion of future councils.
Well, thank you. They were also impressed meeting with you, Mr. Kalan, that you were cooperative. And one of the things that I heard is that you said a statement, and maybe you said it in open session, that they can look at the city's books to make sure about how money is being spent. Is that correct?
Yes, Councilmember Murillo, the city is required to go through a very specific methodology to create fees. That's because fees that are too high are illegal taxes.
Right.
So we have what I would characterize as detailed accounting that goes into the backup for these fees. It's based on the hours expended, how long a project takes, who all is involved. And those books are open for review.
Very good. Thank you.
Hotchkiss.
Quick question. I'm not sure to whom I address this. If there's a graffiti on a news rack, who takes care of that, and how do we handle that?
Yeah, that would be the owner who would take care of that.
Do we inform them usually?
We would probably not be out there inspecting and catch that,
Right.
but the new ordinance is going to have their contact information on the unit, so somebody that sees that would be able to contact the owner directly. And we're also getting an echo of that contact that the owner is supposed to also let us know what complaints that they have received. And so we'll get it somehow.
All right, good. Second question. At one point, there was a query about what advertising can actually appear on the individual news racks, and my understanding is, at least as we've shown here, it's only the publication that that news rack holds. Is that in our ordinance to reaffirm that?
Councilmember Hotchkiss, it is. We clarified the language in the ordinance to prohibit any off-premises advertising, so it will only be the publication that can advertise. So, for example, if the Independent had an issue that was related to Fiesta, they could advertise their Fiesta issue,
Sure.
but no off-premises by means of no one other than the publication itself.
No third party, in other words.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, considering that the Finance Committee reviewed the fees and approved them, and all that's been said here, and the incredible effort that everybody's undertaken, I'd like to move that we recommend this this ordinance and to the City Council for approval of the amendments herein. Thank you.
I'll consider seconding it. If I can ask one more question, a follow-up on graffiti. So, but the racks and cabinets that belong to the city's responsible for graffiti removal, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, I, maintain my position that I think we should have had another ordinance committee meeting. I think the news press was under the impression that this item was going to be continued, and I thought we owed it to the news media to participate. Mr. Kaufman's the only person who showed up today. But I am satisfied with the discussion that we've had, and I would forward it to City Council. I really like the idea of staff interacting outside of these formal meetings, talking about things. I was really appreciative of the stakeholder gatherings, informal, talk about what they need. It is an important business out there, conveying what happens at City Hall. But with my speech said, I'll second the motion.
Okay, very good. I just had one, like I said, I missed the first round of this, but, even though, the city, you have gone out of your way to contain costs on a CPI basis. It doesn't limit the number of hours that engineering may choose to spend on this particular project. So there is a little bit of uncertainty. I don't think there's any way to really control that. My fear is this, and this isn't just from my conversation with Mr. Cole. It's as somebody who buys advertising in both the main papers. My rates haven't gone up in probably 12 or 14 years, and which is great for me, but it's also an indicator of what's going on. I know the percentage, I know what the size of the news press is now compared to what it used to be, and I know what the Independent is. And as this seems to be a diminishing industry, what I don't want to do is I don't want to crush it or crush the life out of the remaining whatever's left in that industry without giving them an ability to perhaps cure the blight themselves. And that's my little caution on this thing. I understand where we're coming from an ordinance standpoint, but and I don't know what's going on with other cities. I certainly haven't looked into any of that and how they handle this. We do have a blight issue. I don't know how it's been cured in the past. I don't know how to best cure it now. I've got some ideas about that. That may be able, as Mr. Kaufman put out, may be able to be handled in their private way. So I'm a little cautious about this myself, but I will call the question as we had a motion and a second. All in favor?
Well, I have one comment, if I could. I don't think that this is going to make or break any newspaper. If it does, they're in much worse shape than they would ever admit to. So, but it's actually part of their marketing budget, and it's important to them. As you pointed out from the Independent, it's how you look is represented by how your news racks are maintained. So this is all part of their budget, and it should be. And it's the city working with them to make the very best, give them the very best opportunity to sell their newspapers, which is exactly what we want to do. So, yes, go ahead, sir.
I'm sorry, if I may, Mr. Chair, I think the increase in fees will challenge brand new publications that are trying to break into the market. And I know there's some Spanish language newspapers that are trying to get in here. So yes, I hear what you're saying, but it is creating a challenge for new publications. But that said, I'm ready to vote.
Okay. Call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
I'm going to say no just to stir the pot and make the discussion a little more interesting when we get to council. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.